We, going back into the Philippines with MacArthur, they had been, invaded by Japan and were under the Japanese control. So we threw out liberation flyers to them saying, the Yanks have landed, you'll be liberated. So they were extremely happy to see us there and get the Japanese out of their country. Up at Okinawa, this was a Japanese possession, and we had to treat the citizens there as an enemy until otherwise, but they just seemed sort of neutral. We did, treat them with respect, let them come through the lines at particular times and so forth, but I really don't know how they felt. We were actually invading their country, but in the Philippines, it was a liberation deal.
I'd like to speak to that point because I joined a unit as a replacement. And I went to Italy, and Italy had just recently surrendered. Italy was part of the Axis, as you probably know from your history class, I'm sure, and they were defeated. They gave up. So by the time we got to Italy and we landed in Naples, the Italians were now, our, so to speak, our allies, because those troops that wanted to were able to fight for the Allied cause. But the conditions there are beyond description. You have no idea of how hungry and how destitute these people were. They had been at war since 1940, and had been in war in Africa before that, in Ethiopia. So the country was in very bad shape. Children were literally starving before you, and you had to watch your equipment because thievery was rampant. If you had a blanket, for example, an army blanket, we were all issued two, you had to watch those blankets because people would steal those and they would make clothing. They had no yard goods, no clothing. So you walk down the street and you'd see people, boys and girls, walking with girls with skirts that were made out, were made out of army blankets, or jackets that were made out of army blankets. So things were very, very poor. The very first morning I joined my unit and went to breakfast, I had my mess kit and I was going to put my scraps away, and a sergeant who was an Italian from Chicago, he says, "No, you don't put that in the garbage. These kids are standing here with tin cans begging for your scraps," and he lined them up and made sort of a mockery of Mussolini and Hitler. They had to recite a certain phrase, which I won't repeat to you, before we could give them the scraps, but they get their little number 10 cans filled with scraps and run home, and they fed the family on it. That's how bad it was.
I can tell you a little what it was like in Casablanca, Morocco. That was French West Africa territory. We first landed there, and the people were hungry. They were starving. Food was scarce, but it wasn't too long till supplies started arriving from the United States. The Navy made a naval operating base out of the harbor there, and one night, while our ship was tied up there, some of the troops from the Dakar region were bartering with our sailors for clothing, underwear, stockings, mattress covers, anything they could get. Finally, I sold one mattress cover to one of the soldiers. Everything in the Navy was stenciled with your name on it. 6 weeks later, as we come back into that harbor to refuel, walking down the street, one of the sailors ahead of me said, "Look, Chief, look at that lady ahead of you." Here was this Arab lady, completely clothed, clear to the ground, but right down the middle of her back was my name, C.K. Field, stenciled. So I knew where my mattress cover had gone.
That's a great story.
I was in Australia, and those people over there were so appreciative of us being there. The town at Townsville, where the 5th Air Force originated, and it's the only Air Force unit that's still active today from World War II. But all the women and the children had been evacuated from Townsville because we got bombed 2 or 3 times a night with the Japanese. And they were, the Australian people today, this day, my wife and I have been back there 3 times, and they treat us just like family or better than family. They can't do enough for us when we're there.